Okay, so good afternoon to everyone. And first of all, thank you for coming and thank you for being part of this event where we would like to launch the PSAC report, the Private Sector Advisory Group report. As you know, the report is prepared with the private sector companies that are members of the group created by the Sustainable Development Goals Fund, which is a mechanism created with the approval of the Agenda 2030 by member states in the General Assembly. And the idea is to use the fund as a mechanism to put together all the actors, member states, private sector, civil society, and academia, trying to work for the implementation of the SDGs. So I have to say that this afternoon, I'm really very, very proud and very happy because we have an incredible panel here, all of them women, which is not a very usual thing here and in many other settings. So, and I'm really very proud, especially because the idea of this panel is to give the voice to all the stakeholders that are participating in the implementation of the SDGs with the private sector. So we have here a representation from the UN system, we have a representation from member states, we have also a representation from the private sector, and as the director of the Sdg Fund, I'm going to chair this event. So I'm really very proud that the best people that we found in order to have this panel were all of them women. So congratulations to all of you. And I would like just only to say that this report was prepared this year on Goal 16, trying to see how can we engage all the stakeholders in order to ensure the implementation of Goal 16, keeping in mind that peace and inclusive societies require a lot of efforts, not only from the governmental side, but also from the private sector side and from the civil society side. So what we are trying to do in the report, even if now Rangita de Silva will explain a little bit more about that, what we are trying to do in the report is to listen the voices of the private sector that are working on that. And also we would like to share the experiences that we have in the Sdg Fund, working with private sector in the field and trying to improve the life of the people. So I'm going to give the floor first to Rangita de Silva. The idea of this panel is just to have a very short explanation about the content of the report. And then the idea is to give the voice to the different stakeholders here. So I'm going to give first the floor to Rangita de Silva, who is the Associate Dean for International Programs in the University of Pennsylvania Law School. She is working with us in the fund as advisor for academic issues, and she was responsible to find a legal firm and some lawyers working from different countries and also putting together everything. And before really to start with the whole presentation, I also wanted to use this chance to give thanks to all the members of the panel for being here, also to all the private sector companies that participated in the process, to Rangita for sure, and Bob Cosomano, who is also here with us and was working very hard. He was the author of the first draft of the report. And for sure also the UN agencies that participated with us in the implementation of the programs, as well as the SDGF team that did an incredible job really to have the report on time today here. So Rangita, if you like, you have the floor. Thank you.
Ambassador Mejia, Director Duran, and honored global stakeholders, this is indeed a historic moment. The report is a tryst with destiny, and it is also a promise that is kept, and one that was made by the United Nations and the private sector at the very launch of the SDGs in 2015. In 2015, Secretary Ban Ki-moon spoke to the business community just a day after the adoption of the SDGs and said, governments must take the lead in living up to their pledges, but at the same time, I'm counting on the private sector to strive and drive success. And he said, now is the time to mobilize the global business community as never before. The case is clear. Realizing the Sustainable Development Goals will improve the environment for building markets and the rule of law. And just last month, the new Secretary General Guterres, was more brutal in his own words when he said, let me start by a brutal sentence. Either the Sustainable Development Goals are fully assumed with enlightened self-interest by the business community, the private sector, and the financial sector, or the Sustainable Development Goals will be a very nice exercise in diplomatic discussions in New York, and maybe in some policies of some governments, but the impact on people, the impact on poverty, the impact on the planet will be extremely, extremely small. These were his words spoken just last month. This is now an objective that can only work if the whole of society engages, and without your leadership, the private sector, our project will simply fail. So the UN Sdg Fund, under Paloma Duran's leadership, has taken up this charge and issued a call to action. So our joint report is indeed a clarion call to action. In essence, the report is a charge for the private sector to be involved on a higher moral ground for the advancement of the human civilization. And in essence, the report calls upon the private sector to privilege the sustainability over transient profitability. This flagship report, developed by the UN Sdg Fund with lead author Bob Cusumano of Penn Law School, and with our prestigious global partnership of the international law firm of McDermott, Will and Emery, and we are so glad to have Elizabeth, the partner of the law firm and one of the lead authors of the case studies, here with us. We have put together a toolbox and a roadmap to show the ways in which the private sector can proactively and constructively do good. The first Sdg Fund report, issued 2 years ago by you, Paloma, stated that many companies do not understand the depth of the SDGs and how best to implement them. And you also stated that it was understood that sustainable development was limited to 3 dimensions: economic, social, and environment. However, our report sets out to correct this. Goal 16 has been described as the 4th dimension of sustainable development, and this moniker emerged at historic consultative processes. And what the Sustainable Development Goals do is go beyond traditional notions of development and the 3 spheres of sustainable development: economic, environment, and social. And what it shows is that all of these goals, all 4 goals, are interconnected with peace building, access to justice, and inclusive institutions. And that goal 16 is the glue, the cross-cutting goal that reflects the overarching commitments of the UN Charter. So goal 16 must be acknowledged as the keystone of sustainable development. And the bedrock of our report is that it is not enough for goal 16 to just react to numerous challenges and obstacles. Instead, goal 16 must be proactive. Instead of adapting after the fact, the private sector must anticipate and begin responding before the fact. This is the ambitious goal of the report. This is the ambitious goal of the report that is being launched today. And I will very quickly speak in terms of 5 pillars of the report. The first, as in combating violence. The increased emphasis on prevention that has been articulated so clearly by Secretary General Guterres represents a meteoric metamorphosis at the United Nations policy. Previously, peace building was originally viewed sequentially, coming after comprehensive peace accords with well-defined belligerents. However, what we now see is that there's a new UN architecture which has ushered in a sea change, codifying the concept of sustaining peace as a goal and a process to build a common vision of a society. So what our report shows so well is that lack of socioeconomic opportunities are drivers of violence and conflict, and that countries that fail to generate high and sustainable levels of growth, or to create decent jobs for their youth, or to reduce poverty and unemployment, or to improve gender equality, or to control corruption, and to manage relationships among different communities in line with human rights obligations are more prone to violence and to violent extremism. And therefore, the private sector has a major role to play in prevention. So here again, the report highlights the work of the private sector, which is working on controlling money laundering and financing of terrorism and building structures on zero tolerance of corruption. Pillar 2 is a pillar that is very close to my own heart, which is the ways in which Goal 16, read together with Goal 5, is a clarion call for gender equality, both as a preventative tool and as an important signifier of the rule of law. Corporate board leadership is an important cornerstone of the private sector leadership, which has enormous public sphere impact. And what we see is that the feminization of boards also engages the private sector in the public goal of fostering women's corporate leadership. Such policies, if universalized, would fundamentally shift both corporate governance and public governance, increasing the role of women in corporate governance, increases gender equality by advancing women's contribution to the public economy. Recent studies show that higher numbers of women in executive positions can result in higher rates of corporate return on equity. Similarly, Ambassador Mejia, you will endorse to the fact that countries with higher levels of women's political representation tend to have higher levels of economic growth. Our report also builds a new vernacular. The Sdg 16 targets and indicators all revolve around the rule of law and builds a new language for the United Nations. Our report introduces this new language. One is that the basic view of self-interest, where private sector itself, as a creature of the rule of law, depends on reliable rules and reasonable justice. Secondly, the enlightened cooperation approach, or ethos, sees the private sector building its own effective, accountable, and inclusive institutions and supporting the expansion of rule of law in the society, which goes far beyond that of the first principle of do no harm. So, how do we then deal with the pillar 3, which is the cost of corruption, which is one of the most insidious threats to the SDGs? The World Bank has tried to analyze the costs, the tangible costs of corruption. Business and individuals pay an estimated 1.5 trillion in bribes each year. And this is about 2% of the global GDP and about 10 times the value of overseas development assistance. 6 groundbreaking case studies that were researched and analyzed by our partner, the global law firm of McDermott, Will and Emery, very clearly analyzes some of both the new developments in lawmaking in anti-corruption, but also the challenges and the gaps that are still present in those laws. So whether it is in Cambodia, where work still needs to be done, but some work has begun where the private sector is working together, both with the Transparency International Cambodia as well as the government, to offer anti-corruption cards to citizens who sign up to a declaration against corruption initiatives, to Uzbekistan and Zimbabwe, which provide for training of judges in anti-corruption and have set up guidelines both in constitutional processes as well as legislative processes where the judiciary are prohibited from engaging in any political activities. There are rules and regulations on anti-corruption that need to be put into implementation and in practice. These laws are still only paper laws unless they become living laws through political will. And finally, I want to speak of what I think is the critical and pivotal factor of this report. This report showcases and represents the ways in which the Sdg Fund has built important partnerships and built bridges between and across the private sector as well as academic institutions. And the pivotal role that academic institutions, including premier law schools like my own law school, the University of Pennsylvania Law School, can play in advancing the Sustainable Development Goals. That these goals cannot be advanced in a vacuum and in isolation of academic institutions and academic partners. Because our goal as academic partners is to train the next generation of leaders, thought leaders and practitioners who are going to realize the benefits of the SDG goals. Therefore, it is important that SDG 16 be read in light of SDG 17. And although, Paloma, we are proud of this flagship report, which analyzes the private sector's role in advancing Goal 16, it is also a masterpiece in realizing Goal 17, which is one of global partnership building. So thank you again, and thank you for your inspiration, and thank you, Ambassador Mejia, for being with us, because you represent those highest moral values that advance the rule of law in combination with the private sector and the global community. Thank you.
Thank you, Rangita. So now that we know more or less about the content of the report, we are going to open the discussion, trying to listen all the stakeholders. So first of all, I'm going to introduce Ana Maria Menendez, who is the Senior Advisor on Policy in the Office of the Secretary General and responsible for the gender parity strategy that the new Secretary General approved just some weeks ago. So congratulations for that, and let's see if with this type of panels and work we can move forward really to ensure the gender parity. But today we have Ana Maria Menendez not only for that, but also because she is working on prevention, which is one of the most important parts of the Goal 16. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon. I'd like to congratulate the Sdg Fund, UPenn Law, and all the partners from the public and private sectors that have contributed to this report. The report provides interesting examples of what can be done to advance efforts under SDG 16, but also gives us useful insights in the context of the renewed approach of the Secretary General in the area of prevention. The SG has placed prevention as one of his key priorities. And in doing so, he was very much guided by a keen awareness that we live in a time of truly global challenges and threats to stability, prosperity, and the planet. Conflicts have become more complex and interlinked than ever before. They produce horrific violations of international humanitarian and human rights law. They limit human opportunities and sustainable development. People have been forced to flee their homes on a scale unseen in decades. Mega trends, including climate change, urbanization, food insecurity, and water scarcity, have increased competition for resources and heightened tensions and instability. Long-standing threats, such as terrorism, have taken on new and frightening global dimensions. The human and financial costs are unsustainable. The economic impact of violence was more than 14 trillion US dollars in 2016, and this is nearly 13% of the global GDP. Resources that should be channeled to sustainable development are instead being used to respond to crises. The Secretary General resolved upon taking office that this logic needed to change, and he has put in motion a set of reforms and formulated a vision on prevention that should guide our work. In his vision statement, he himself defines prevention as, and I'm quoting, doing everything we can to help countries avert the outbreak of crises that take a high toll on humanity, undermining institutions and capacities to achieve peace and development, end quote. Prevention should permeate everything that we do to cut across all pillars of the UN work and join us up for greater synergy and effective delivery. One important anchor to this new approach is the recognition that Agenda 2030 is the best investment that we can make in preventing crises. Preventive measures should be far broader than simply addresses the imminence of crisis. They should tackle the structural or root causes of crisis. The premise for that is that we can't fulfill the promise to leave no one behind without meaningful efforts to address the root causes of the crisis. We need also to focus our efforts where it matters the most, at the field level, where women and men are at the core of our actions. Today, we are presented with a new report that provides some answers and raises many questions in the relevant aspects of prevention. How the private sector can contribute to peaceful, just, and inclusive societies. By relying on the Sdg Fund's extensive experience and its partnerships between UN agencies, governments, civil society, and private sectors, we can find some of the answers. There are three elements that I would like to highlight. The first one is the need for integrated and joined-up responses. If, as I said before, roots of conflict and other forms of crises are multidimensional, such as climate change, political representation, gender inequality, responses need to be integrated and multidimensional as well. We found a good example in the Sdg Fund partnerships in Sierra Leone, where the extractive industry in the Kono district has signed an agreement with communities and local advocacy organizations that will allow citizens to have a voice in the management of their natural resources. Second, private sector should recognize its role in prevention. According to this report, private sector actors are somehow reluctant to see themselves as part of prevention. Beyond adopting a do-no-harm approach, the private sector can have an active role in promoting national anti-corruption policies and inclusive hiring practices, among other things. In Colombia, my good friend, the Ambassador Maria Emma is here, engagement with the private sector in the peace process serves as a good example of this. In many other places, the private sector plays a key role in strengthening the resilience of communities to face natural disasters or other forms of shocks. Third, this is all about putting people at the center of prevention and sustainable development. Perhaps the most inspiring part of the report are case studies where we see young women and men, small business owners, entrepreneurs, and civil society organizations who want to contribute to a more peaceful society. The UN contributes to crisis prevention, but on the ground, it is millions of active citizens who want to build a better future for themselves and their communities. The role of the UN is to enable them to do this. In Côte d'Ivoire, the Sdg Fund is helping young women access legal information thanks to the Association des Femmes Juristes de Côte d'Ivoire. which focuses on women and children at risk of abuse, negligence, violence, and exploitation. With their legal rights ensured, the organization helps these young women start their own businesses through entrepreneurship programs. People around the world want peace and development. With the 2030 Agenda, the UN is relying on powerful instruments to provide better opportunities to millions of people afflicted by crises. But, ladies and gentlemen, this is not sustainable if we do not work together to do so. Thank you very much.
Thank you, USG. And now I'm going to give the floor to Her Excellency Maria Emma Mejia, Permanent Representative of Colombia to the UN. I'm really especially happy to have you here because I still remember the first report that we launched here when we opened the conversation in 2015 about the role of the private sector, and now we are with the third report trying to show that it's feasible to work with the private sector and that we have already evidences that it's feasible to do it in order to improve the life of the people. So thank you so much for being with us again.
Thank you. Thank you so much to you, Paloma, for leading the way through the Sdg Fund. Thank you, USG, and thank you to my dear friend. We are so proud to have Penn University with us, a prestigious law school, and the commitment that I think is essential to this merging, to this formula. We need academia, we need private sector, and we need, of course, the institutions. I wanted to bring you back to the past when we had the Millennium Development Goals. And when we had the goals, the Millennium Development Goals, even our governments took a long time to really appropriate the Millennium Development Goals. So I believe almost 10 years on the road that we, our National Department of Planning, the private sector sort of realized that we had an agenda of the rich to the poor, an agenda of the developed world to the developing world. And then we began to work in a different ship with a different paradigm, and it was the SDGs. Colombia has a lot to do with the, I would say, the ownership of the sustainability part. Since Rio +20, Colombia insisted, Paula Caballero, one of the members of the, you know it well, that story, but Colombia began to work with the idea that this new agenda should be a sustainable agenda, as now the SG is introducing, as Ana Maria and you said, Pangita, try to say that we have to work in prevention and sustaining peace, the same elements incorporated. So you see how it was united. And we had this, we had to fight a lot in the negotiations to get goal 16. I mean, it was a very difficult battle. We stayed in this room many, many nights, many mornings, fighting because the notion of having elements of rule of law and peaceful societies was something that in many occasions in the history of the United Nations is separate. Peace and security is separate from development. And it had to be introduced. And now we see, with this report in particular, how cross-cutting the issue of SDG 16 is to societies and to really be able to achieve leaving no one behind in the year 2013. 2013 is around the corner, unfortunately. 2013, we already have gone 2 years. I mean, almost going to the third year of the Sustainable Development Goals. So I think that I will try very briefly to say how we view it from Colombia, a country with a conflict, as you all know, a country, a middle-income economy. I mean, a country that is not supposed to be under the poor line of the countries. Unfortunately, the inequality is still there. And also we had a conflict for over 5 decades. So that divided our country into urban areas with development. I mean, you know it, and I'm sure you will talk about it. But of course, it sort of created like 2 worlds, like two countries. And the countryside, the rural areas where 12 million people live, and lived without the institutions, without the presence of the private sector, even without the presence of academia, because the guerrilla, it was a confrontation between the guerrilla and the army, so it was very difficult for communities or for private sector to participate. So I think that long process that left 7 million internally displaced IDPs and 270,000 killed in this long, prolonged conflict that is now being worked with the UN support. We have now just 36 days today on our second mission, special political mission, that will accompany us for an initial period of 1 year, prolonged to up to 3 years. And we began for 101 days until the 9th of January, a ceasefire exercise. I wouldn't say more than that, but an exercise to try and see if we can bring in the ELN, which is our second hardest sort of group that has unfortunately done a lot of damage to our natural resources because of the pipelines being sort of blown all the time and kids in conflict. So with that difficulty, we had, very interestingly, in the 5 times that we tried to negotiate, particularly from you, Beatriz, and from what we call the Sindicato Antioqueño, which is this sort of part of the country that dedicated itself and brought many of us that were young politicians and young public servants to maybe try to see and to imagine how we could work together and why the root causes of the conflict. That is something that the study works very much. I mean, is it because we're poor that the insurgency was created? Is it the other way around? Is it the inequalities on the country? So the private sector was there. In this last peace process, I think it took longer than we expected it. 5 years, very close. We were in Cuba, so it was a very close negotiation, and the private sector didn't have, or the country itself, didn't have the opportunity to participate and to know the process. So they arrived when the peace was signed. And of course, that was a difficult part. And now in the implementation is when we call upon, and the private sector, as always, is there. How, I mean, the examples that you give, the exercise that Ana Maria mentioned, and that is in the report on Cauca. Cauca, which is the area in the Pacific of Colombia, in the Pacific coast, the area that was more hit by the different causes of violence, the insurgency, the paramilitaries that were created to combat insurgency because the state wasn't enough, the drug trafficking and the organized crime that was there. So you had all this terrible situation, and Cauca is an example in which we can work with the World Food Organization, we can work on quinoa, we can work with peasants, with the communities, and probably with the insurgents in a system that has already been proven. We have a few members here of the private sector from Colombia, has been proven how the empowerment of microcredits, how the empowerment of guerrillas that they didn't have even an ID, because they always had an alias, so they don't exist legally. They're just beginning to exist. So the exercise is important. And I think that this is a broad alliance among government and civil society and academia and the UN system and NGOs in special SDG with a private sector that is essential to carry on the SDGs. I think it's no other way. As we didn't do it in the MDGs, now we can do it with the SDGs. This is an agenda in which developing and developed world have to work together. It's not that Germany is not working or the United States is not working. This is an agenda, it's a holistic agenda. So I think this is an opportunity that we have, and I think this is an opportunity in which the implementation of the peace agreement in Colombia, maybe that is a model here at the UN, because unfortunately we don't have many successes. It's sad to say, but we are not having many successes in the world in the matters of peace and security with the reforms that the Secretary General is introducing to the organization, and with examples like ours, in which if we are able to find a way in which academia we have, for the very first time, 9 universities of the most prestigious public and private universities are, like you, private sector, working with us, this time in the field, how the students can go to the zones of conflict and work there and exercise their studies with communities that have not seen the state for long. So I think if we have that, and we have the private sector, and we have the Sdg Fund in an exercise so collective as this one, I think we can achieve an agenda that surprisingly enough, I mean coincidentally enough, goes hand in hand. 15 years is the top of our design for the peace process to achieve peace in the agreement. We gave us a chance of 15 years, and we are giving us a chance of 15 years to achieve SDGs and Agenda 2030. So I think together, I'm sure we can introduce that change, and I thank you so much, because I mean, this is it's hard to applaud at the UN. You know, we never applaud in sessions, and it's so good to see that at least we have something to applaud on, and that we would be here next year and years to come. And you have to have faith, because sometimes either UN or the governments or member states or Côte d'Ivoire may fail, we may fail in the exercises, but we have a chance, you know, and give us that chance, hopefully to succeed or to fail together, but to recuperate and walk on. So thank you very much. Thank you, Paloma.
Thank you, Ambassador. And I'm going now to give the floor to Carla Mukabi, who is representative, is the director of the Office of FAO here in New York. FAO is the second agency receiving the largest amount of money from the fund. We are working in many of our programs in the field in different countries in the 5 regions of the UN. And usually we work together very close. So thank you, Carla, for being here. And I think that we have some people in the panel that have to leave now. So I reiterate really my gratitude for your time and for being here this afternoon. So, Carla.
Thank you very much, Paloma. And I also want to recognize Ambassador Maria Emma Mejia and really applaud his intervention. And of course, congratulate for this successful peace agreement that is really historic and a good example that we should really follow, countries should follow, and the UN will be there to support. And I also want to recognize all the participants. We are really grateful as FAO for the opportunity to really participate in this event, and of course, once again, congratulate the fund for launching such an important and particularly timely report. From the FAO lens, I wanted to say that after a prolonged decline over the last decade, the recently released report on the state of food security and nutrition in the world, which is one of the flagships of the FAO, the one actually launched the last September, presents alarming figures. I call it alarming because we see the increase of hunger in the world. The number of chronically undernourished people has increased from 777 million in 2015 to 815 million in 2016. So we see an additional 38 million of people who are growing hungry. And this is really happening 2 years after the adoption of the 2030 agenda. And it is really alarming. And we also see that much of the increase in food insecurity can be traced to the greater number of conflicts, often exacerbated by climate-related shocks, which, of course, will severely hamper our efforts to end hunger by 2030, as SDG 2 is required, or is asking to. 10 out of 13 major food crises in the world today are in conflict-affected countries. And as the FAO Director General normally say several times, there can be no food security without peace, and no lasting peace without food security. And this was, again, really confirmed by Ambassador when she really spoke about the experience of Colombia. Coming to, of course, what brings us today, the partnership with the private sector, I would like to say that non-state actors really play a fundamental role in achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. You said so, Paloma, and of course the report is really showing that. And including SDG 16, which is, of course, the main topic of the report today. And this includes, of course, the private sector that we know is really contributing and can really contribute with technologies, innovation, and the investment needed to develop economies and to promote sustainable development. So we really see private sector having a key role. FAO considers the private sector to be a key ally in the fight against hunger. Actually, effective engagement with the private sector can help the fight against hunger and malnutrition by enhancing, for instance, FAO work, but not only in agriculture, fisheries, forestries, natural resources management, and the value chain from farmer to consumers. It's really key what they can really do, and we have great examples that are really showing that, and the fund is actually financing some of them, and this is also shown in the report. So the link between productive development and peace is increasingly recognized in all spheres. And there is no productivity development without the private sector. The private sector also plays an important role in policy dialogue. Ambassador, you mentioned about the importance of course, their involvement in the implementation of the peace process in your country, participating in debates around the development models, state and economic reforms, investment and job creation. And this means that they have a potential bridging role among several social groups to generate social, economic, and political stability. Private sector investments and intervention in contexts vulnerable to conflict should pursue a transparent and deliberate approach supportive of rural infrastructures, for example, community livelihoods, and social institutions, while also recognizing the often deeply fragile nature of the context. So connecting communities and supporting resilience engenders a long-term economic environment conducive to sustainable private sector engagement. We know, for instance, that agriculture is critical in conflict because it is mainly the main source of livelihoods of an average of 80% of those affected by conflict. When we talk particularly of those who are really left behind, most of them are living in rural areas. And 3/4 of chronic undernourished and those living in poverty are, as I indicated, in rural areas. So food security and nutrition interventions and policies, therefore, have a role to play in contributing to sustaining peace. And we also see the role of business in contributing to peace. For example, in Colombia, through SDG Fund, this is one of the examples that we wanted to share, but we could share so many, FAO, UNDP, UN Women, and WFP. We are really working with the government, private sector also included, and the social organizations to create opportunities for income generation efforts for ex-combatants and victims of violence. And again, in Colombia, but also in other countries, the SDG funds have been helping to catalyze efforts to create productive development opportunities, bringing together different actors, including the private sector, to work together to address the challenges of poverty and hunger. And the FAO is also involved in a number of programs financed by the Sdg Fund. For instance, in Colombia, the example of Cote d'Ivoire was also mentioned, Vietnam, among others. And those projects, they range from aiming to create employment, which is really very important when we talk about peace and justice, improve the livelihoods, ensure better nutrition in a post-conflict setting, to integrate, for instance, nutrition and food security strategy for children and vulnerable groups. And together with the private sector, we are working also to create peaceful and inclusive societies to build the world we want, where peace, justice, and strong institution is a reality. So there are really concrete examples that are showing that it's possible, it's feasible, as just to borrow the words from Paloma. We wanted also to mention that with the FAO, we really have a strategy for partnership with the private sector that was approved in 2013. And this really demonstrates the FAO commitment to working hand in hand with the private sector. And this strategy also highlights the mutual benefits of this collaboration. Private sector can contribute, for example, to strengthening local agribusiness and creation of decent rural employment, particularly for youth and women, young girls. And strong private sector participation is also important in food security and nutrition policy dialogue at national and international level. In the past, we used to see private sector as a source of funding. This is not the case. We consider the private sector as a partner, and as such, we need the private sector, the civil society, the academia, all partners really are at the table. Of course, talking from the FAO side, I will say that discussing food security and nutrition issues and the way forward, this is really important. And private sectors can also complement government programs, as well as programs that, in our case, developed at the local level in order to really boost markets. This is one of the obstacles that we've been talking about, the opportunities that we can give the farmers to reach the market. International, large, and medium-sized enterprises can really provide support to local small and medium enterprise and other actors. Strengthening national capacity building is key, and this can also boost economic growth. And this can also be manifested through the equitable distribution of goods and services, enabling access to agriculture insurance, which is also key when we look at the rural areas, providing credit and financing opportunities, agriculture inputs, and improved production techniques, among others. How the private sector should engage is always a question that we ask, particularly when it comes to engaging in rural areas. And the key challenge is channeling private investments in a way that really contribute to sustainable development, and its benefits are shared by the vast majority of the people. This is important. And the principles for responsible investment in agriculture and food systems, which was endorsed by the Committee on World Food Security in 2014, identify ways to reach these desirable goals. Among other things, those principles really note that the stakeholders should play their role in resilience building and coordinate their efforts in order to prevent or respond to shocks, disasters, crises, and conflicts. They are really encouraged to support the most vulnerable and promote targeted investments in food security and nutrition. So let me conclude by saying that the report released today on business and SDG 16 really lays out in concrete terms why SDG 16 is relevant for the private sector, and how business can contribute to peace through initiatives supporting justice. With conflicts and hunger so deeply interlinked, there are no shortages in way that the private sector can contribute to the agriculture sector to support livelihoods, help to prevent conflicts, and promote peaceful and inclusive societies. So no organization or government can really eradicate hunger and poverty alone. This needs to be a joint effort, and the private sector is an important partner. But of course, I have to mention the civil society, the academia, the government. We have to work together. Thank you.
Thank you, Carla. I think that really the approach from the FAO is really the confirmation that Goal 16 is a kind of a cross-cutting issue that really has an impact in all the goals that we have in the agenda. So thank you so much. And now I'm going to give the floor to the person that we have to talk on behalf of the private sector. Sol Beatriz Arango is the president of Servicios Nutresa and the vice president for sustainable development and general director of the foundation of the company. I have to recognize that Nutresa, and especially Sol, was one of our first partners in the private sector advisory group. It was one of the first companies that really support the idea in the fund to work with the private sector, not only as a donor, but as a real actor trying to co-design and co-implement with them the implementation of the agenda in the field. So I have to recognize that many of the things that now I'm able to say about the private sector is because I received some private classes from Sol and from all other members from the private sector advisory group. So really glad to have you here, Sol.
Thank you, Paloma. It is an honor for me to be invited to speak in this panel after these important women and bright women and profound. And on behalf of my colleagues from the SDG Advisory Group, Ambassador Mejia, Ms. Carla Mukavi, Dr. Rangita da Silva, Paloma Duran, dear colleagues and dear audience. Peace is a superior goal deserved by all inhabitants of this planet. Therefore, to achieve it, the entire society needs to take on responsibilities. Peace requires and deserves a great deal of time, efforts, resources, and leadership from governments, UN agencies, and NGOs. However, they should not work alone any longer. The equation of a successful and long-lasting peace includes necessarily also the leadership of the private sector. Both personally and on behalf of Grupo Nutresa, I would like to express that I am very grateful to have the opportunity today to share with you some ideas and initiatives on how the private sector can be an active part in the process with the purpose of contributing to achieve SDG 16 and to set the foundations for building together a better future for all. First, let me talk a little bit about the organization I represent. Grupo Nutresa is one of the largest food companies in Latin America with leading positions in the food industry markets of cold cuts, biscuits, chocolates, coffee, ice cream, pasta, restaurants, and food retail. The group has more than 46,000 employees, direct operation in 14 countries, mainly in America from US to Chile, with revenues for more than $3 billion, and 62 of which are earned in Colombia. Our sustainability strategy focuses on 6 priorities: integral behavior, inclusive development, environmental responsibility, corporate citizenship, health and nutrition, and innovation and profitable growth. Each priority looks after certain goals with specific SDGs, and managers allocate resources and efforts aiming to close the gaps according to the country, to the stakeholders, and of course, according to the business objectives. I have to say here, Paloma, that being members of the Sdg Fund, Private Sector Advisory Group, has boosted our alignment and inclusion of the SDGs in our strategy in a very early stage. Thank you very much for that. Due to the characteristics of our portfolio, we have to reach more than 1 million points of sales every week or every month at least, and source continuously agricultural raw materials such as coffee, cocoa, milk, pork, poultry, meat, peanuts, palm oil, etc. So therefore, violence and conflicts in general in both rural and urban areas of any country that we operate can really affect the services to our customers. In Grupo Nutresa, we know that countries with no armed conflict and with solid institutions are more effective, of course, in facilitating sustainable development. We believe the private sector has a preponderant role in promoting inclusive growth and peaceful societies, enhancing aspects such as reconciliation, transparency, anti-corruption culture, local capabilities, and building the right alliances with different stakeholders to connect the working agenda about our development and peace. Having said that, I would like to take some minutes and to share some recent examples of our approach to building stronger institutions through multiple initiatives that we have undertaken in Grupo Nutresa. I'm going to talk about 4 initiatives that have to do with the pillars that Dr. Rangita just mentioned of the report. The first initiative I would like to share has to do with our understanding of the role that the private sector plays somehow in the promotion and establishment of the rule of law. In line with it, we have created a program. The name is Acting with Integrity Program. The program is about the development of practices and guidelines generally higher than those required by law in all the countries that we operate to respect ethical principles, fight and prevent corruption and bribery in all their forms, as well as any behavior related to illegal activities in our subsidiaries, suppliers, and clients. In order to put this in practice, training activities are carried out across the entire organization and are specifically focused on key employees and contractors with a higher level of vulnerability. We have strengthened all reporting mechanisms, such as Ethics Line, Committee on Ethics, Committee of Transparency, and Committee of Conflicts of Interest, among others. Furthermore, as part of the program, our organization has implemented a system that provides tools for preventing the money laundering and terrorism financing risks, showing excellent results in the value chain. Second initiative, proactive participation in the peace process. Ambassador Mejia just mentioned it. By being an important and committed actor in Colombia, our group has been present in all the peace initiatives that different governments have undertaken. In the recent peace process, peace negotiation process held with the armed groups, Grupo Nutresa has been actively involved early on because we consider that peace is a citizen's right that the Colombian society should not give up. Initially, Grupo Nutresa supported the negotiations with other private companies, along with a think tank, Pro Antioquia, a renowned university, EAFIT, and an important business association, ANDI, with the purpose of conducting a deep review of the peace agreements while they were being discussed, in order to provide specific and grounded recommendations, ensuring their relevance and feasible implementation. In fact, during the process, our CEO attended with a group of independent leaders and government officials to Havana to a work sessions of the negotiators to give comments on the agreements. After the peace agreements were signed, Grupo Nutresa joined the Business Council for Sustainable Peace. This group, which is formed by more than 50 corporations from multiple sectors, think tanks, NGOs, and business associations, is a voluntary, independent, apolitical, plural, and diverse initiative focused on ensuring that the execution is reflected in the signed agreements, as well as on guaranteeing that the red lines are not crossed, and confirming that the opportunities created in the peace negotiations effectively strengthen the market economy. It is a work that is still in progress. Third initiative, productive and inclusive alliances. Carla just mentioned it. Grupo Nutresa strongly believes in developing people's and communities' capabilities as an important driver for sustainable peace. Cocoa farmers in Colombia are usually low-income communities located in very poor rural areas with scarce opportunities to meet their basic needs. That is why Grupo Nutresa has decided to make its cocoa development program the pillar of its contribution to a long-lasting, stable peace in Colombia. The scope of this program, which is executed in alliance with the Ministry of Agriculture, local governments, associations, cocoa growers, and NGOs, reflects the company's commitment to develop cocoa clusters in different regions of the country, mainly those that used to be controlled by guerrilla groups. Currently, these productive alliances have in place technical, environmental, and social packages given from Grupo Nutresa for more than 31,000 hectares, benefiting near 15,000 families, almost 60,000 people in total, in 22 departments countrywide. As part of the same program, Grupo Nutresa is working on an initiative for promoting cocoa crops in alliance with the Ministry of Agricultural and Rural Development. This strategy seeks to set nursery gardens to supply and donate cocoa seedlings and grafts to establish and renew cocoa production fields in areas of reintegration or for migration or that are affected by the conflict, such as Cesar, Meta, and Huila, with an expected production of 3 million plants per year. Just this week, a booklet titled Cocoa, Inclusive and Productive Projects has been published as a practical guide for the construction of feasible, profitable, and inclusive cocoa businesses, specifically for the Colombian post-conflict context and actors. Fourth and last initiative, equally important, is our approach to human rights, diversity, and inclusion. We are convinced that respecting human rights and ending discrimination is a necessary condition for security and peace. That is why we have been consolidating human rights, diversity, and inclusion management systems by disseminating and implementing corporate policies focused on promoting and respecting such rights and training teams of executives, of leaders, to help them strengthen their understanding and management of the human rights within the organization. Furthermore, and just to mention a current and successful practice of inclusion within the conflict, Grupo Nutresa with other allies from private sector, NGOs, government entities, and the Colombian Agency for Reintegration designed and implemented Programa Soluciones. This program facilitates employment opportunities for people involved in the armed conflict, reintegrated, victims, displaced, or any post-conflict actors. It enabled their transition through the organizations and provides an inclusive and safe employment environment which allows them to grow both personally and professionally once they are reintegrated to organizations. Finally, I would like to mention that since we are part of the Sdg Fund advisory group, we have reinforced our alignment and inspiration on the global agenda, and we have helped many suppliers, partners, and employees to understand the SDGs. This is the moment to say, Paloma, that we are deeply grateful for everything we have learned, for the networks we have established, and for the capability platforms that we are starting to build. We believe the report, great report, thank you very much for it, that is being launched today will help many actors and institutions to address in a stronger way the inclusion of the SDG 16 as part of the business strategy, contributing to peaceful, just, and inclusive societies, and increasing, of course, the possibilities of creating value and opportunities for all. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you so much, Sol. And now that probably we have to move to the last part of the launching, we have some questions and answers. And I have here some people that already asked for the floor. So I'm going to give the floor first to Simon Sadek, who is a Senior Advisor on Finance to the Deputy Secretary General. So thank you for being here, Simon. The floor is yours.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much indeed. And the Deputy Secretary General sends her apologies. She's currently traveling in Haiti. Certainly if she was here, I think it would make this exceptional panel even more exceptional. But no need, in a sense, given what we've heard over the past 30 to 40 minutes. So much has been said about the role of the private sector that I think bears no repetition. I think the examples from Nutresa are really inspiring. And fortunately, we see a growing number of companies that are not perhaps following suit precisely, but are equally inspired in their contribution more broadly to the Sustainable Development Agenda. Of course, one mustn't forget the basics: jobs, livelihoods, products and services, the payment of taxes, adherence to the rule of law. Obviously, we sort of take those things for granted, and we talk about the plus, the things that one can do further through coalitions, through inspiration, through public policy engagement. But those basics are often the core of what creates stable societies, through markets that function, that deliver services to citizens as they need them. And similarly, perhaps the mystery or elephant in the room is that the private sector is not always like Nutresa. That we understand that many businesses provide jobs that are not decent, products that are toxic, that they don't make tax payments, that they lobby for the wrong outcomes. And actually, often businesses' pursuit of their own business process and success unintentionally create damage. Last year, over $800 billion was invested in upstream and downstream fossil fuel exploitation. Those companies are not intending to do harm, but clearly the climate effects that the use of fossil fuels extracted will have on countries around the world, witness the Caribbean most recently, but also elsewhere, will have devastating effects and impact indirectly peace and security outcomes. So the relationship between the way the business community operates and directly and indirectly peace and security outcomes is multifaceted, is complex, and we need to understand it. And clearly the Sdg Fund is seeking not only to help specific interventions, but also to broaden awareness as to what some of those relationships are and how we can best work on them. I guess if one can get good and one can get bad, and there's no natural outcome from the market, we're fortunate that we have responsible leadership and responsible businesses, and we need to get our heads around what makes that happen beyond inspiring individuals. How do we move cultures of business in the right direction and make engagement and a symbiotic, interdependent relationship with the community part of what is business as usual, rather than perhaps part of what is business unusual and exceptional? How do we drive product and service innovation not only the philanthropic side of the business community, to make sense of what sustainable development and the 2030 agenda is really about, and how do we understand accountability, perhaps, dare I say, beyond the rule of law, to many different stakeholders that are intentionally and unintentionally impacted by what business does. As I was introduced, I'm the senior advisor to the DSG on finance, so it would be remiss of me perhaps not to say a couple of things about money. And in fact, a good reading of what is an excellent report reveals the linkages between finance, business outcomes, SDG 16, and the broader 2030 agenda. Writ simply, impatient money, short-term money, predatory money does harm. And a financial system that is not aligned to the alternative, which is patient money, long-term money, money that takes broader effects of business, that understands the quality of success over long term, systems that don't deliver that are part of the problem, not part of the solution. The success of the Sdg Fund is partly determined by the individual projects that it supports, the individual coalitions of businesses and other players that it helps to catalyze into action, but it will always be a small part of the story, naturally. And the real question is, how does the Sdg Fund impact the bigger system? The global financial system is $300 trillion of financial assets, mostly belonging to us, but most of it is deployed in the wrong way by almost any measure, including even our own savings and pensions for those who have them. And so part of the challenge and opportunity for the Sdg Fund is to use its experience, catalyze its networks, and to try and shape that larger agenda by showing that the Sdg Fund is exceptional but need not be. It can be normal. It can be how the global financial system actually works. And that seems to me the larger agenda that we need to address going forward. So in conclusion, I would obviously add my congratulations. Actually, I think this report is exceptional. There are many reports in this building, and certainly this would be one that I would commend to those here and elsewhere to read. I would encourage the Sdg Fund to be unreasonably ambitious in its next generation of work, going further than the successors you've clearly already had. And thank you very much for the opportunity to speak.
Thank you so much, Simon. I would love to change the system, but I'm not sure that we are in a position to do so. But at least one thing that we can do is that to improve the life of the people in the field. And I promise that now we have evidences that really we have now 3.5 million beneficiaries from our programs during the last 2 years, so which is nothing compared with the needs, but it's something. So I think that this is a very good really result. So now I have some of the members of the private sector advisory group that would like to say also some things. So the first one that I have here in the list is Mr. Tony Cole, who is the CEO of Sahara Group based in Nigeria, and another one that also gave me a lot of teaching about the role of the private sector. So Tony, you have the floor. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Paloma, and good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, everyone has said it's a good report. We are all part of this report. I would say it's a very good report. But having said so, and thanks, Simon, for your points, and these points are very well noted. It's been a long journey, and it's been a journey where we've had to work on one central key that can make reports like this work, and that's trust. We've had to work on trust a lot. We've had to bridge a very big divide in bringing multilateral agencies, the private sector, and civil society together to cross a barrier that this report seeks to bring. There's one thing I'm certain about, and that's peace and security is important to all of us, regardless of where we come from, regardless of what part of the continent we live. Without this, we cannot have our day-to-day lives. We can't sit as we sit today without dealing with peace and security. As a private sector player from Nigeria, from an area that has been also badly hampered by insecurity, we found out that if we do not deal with integrating our business principles with how the society lives on a day-to-day basis, and we do not integrate peace into everything that we do, then we don't have a future. No matter how much you make, you cannot sleep in peace if the society where you operate in is not sorted out. And so we've played an integral part in this report, and the Private Sector Advisory Group has come together to deliver one thing, and that is, from the position of the private sector, how do we work together with multilateral agencies to achieve the very same thing that we all want? And that's a better society. The SDG goals has provided that for us. It's given us an ability to pinpoint and address and identify numbers to things that we've been doing on a day-to-day basis. There are good people in the world. There are also very bad people in the world. There are good causes, and there are also very bad causes. But if every single one of us sits down and we refuse to do what we need to do, then the world will be a very bad place to live in. And so we all have the responsibility to be responsible, to fight as much as we can, to refuse to give up, and hope that one day we will have a much better world. I don't think we have much of a choice, and that's what we do. And so reports like this do one thing. It shows that there is a possibility for different people and different organizations to come together and agree on a course. But it does beyond that. It also shows case studies of people who are doing well, doing good, and doing the right thing in a very, very, very dangerous world and making a difference. And I believe that as long as we continue to do that, others will see this as role models, which I have seen. I've seen that happen in my country, where people see role models getting up and making a difference and following that same course and that same path to make their own impact in their own society. I think Colombia has been one of the best examples I have seen of turning around something that has been very, very bad and pushing it and making it good. And others have seen that and are making a difference, even in Latin America, because of their experience. And Nigeria is doing exactly the same thing. We will lead from the front, and we will continue to make sure that we do that because role models are necessary. This room is full of role models, and that's what we do. So we will stand. Reports like this will bring the fact out into the public, but more importantly, it's what we do by our action that will speak a lot louder than anything that is written in the report. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tony Cole, and I'm going to give the floor to Cristina Moral, who is Corporate Responsibility Senior Management in Ferrovial, which is a company based in Spain, and that we are also working together, especially for advocacy in Europe for the SDGs. So thank you, Cristina, and the floor is yours.
I'd like to express my gratitude to the Sdg Fund, especially to Paloma for all the work done with the private sector. Our membership of the private sector advisory group in the Sdg Fund is helping us to integrate SDGs in our company's DNA, and we are extremely grateful for this initiative. Thanks, Paloma, for giving me this opportunity to talk here today about the project that Ferrovial is carrying out in Colombia in the framework of the Sdg Fund program entitled Productive and Food Secure Territories for a Peaceful and Resilient Cauca. I would like also to offer my congratulations on behalf of the companies that form part of the SDG Fund's private sector advisory for this report entitled Business and Peace, produced with the assistance of the University of Pennsylvania and McDermott, Will and Emery. Congratulations to all involved for doing this great job. In fact, the purpose of this report is the reason why I am speaking here today. Since its foundation in 1952, Ferrovial has always understood that its sustainability hinges essentially on working with the public sector and society. Only in this way can the infrastructures that the company builds, finances, and manages be meaningful in the long term and contribute to the development of the local communities. Moreover, Ferrovial has long understood that to optimize the cooperation, it was necessary to formalize that alliance with it did as a funder in Spain of the Global Compact and contribute to it through specific cooperation programs that deploy the company's best resources, its professionals. As a result, in 2011, we created our social infrastructure program. Its goal is to address the need for drinking water and basic sanitation in disadvantaged communities by working with the third sector and local organizations. Perhaps the most distinctive feature of this initiative is the fact that the company contributes its specialists, its employees' times, who participate in a project from the outset right up to the end of the project. Ferrovial has completed 18 projects to date, benefiting 200,000 people, in which 75 Ferrovial volunteers have worked on site. It was in the framework of this international cooperation program that Ferrovial carried out the project in Colombia in cooperation with the NGO Save the Children under the title Improving Water Supply and Quality for the José Dolores Daza School and Los Milagros community in the municipality of Bolívar in the Cauca department. This project, which is expected to benefit 4,220 people, consists of repairing the water supply system, the school dining room, and the community water distribution system. The project is located in the department of Cauca, in southwest of Colombia, which has a population of over 1 million. As is now a standard practice in Ferrovial's social infrastructure program, in addition to the infrastructure that had to be developed, another primary focus of the project was on community awareness raising and training on how to make the best use of the facilities. And this is where the project is clearly linked to the Sdg Fund program in Cauca. We all know about the conflict that Colombia has gone through over 50 years. The Cauca department has been on the front line of the devastating conflict, resulting in a situation of vulnerability that has prevented the development needed for the region to prosper. For this reason, in 2015, the United Nations, through the Sdg Fund, launched a project entitled Productive and Good Food Secure Territories for a Peaceful and Resilient Cauca, under the umbrella of which Ferrovial and Save the Children have been operating. Through this joint action, Ferrovial is addressing not only the goal number 3, 6, and 9, but also the goal number 16, which is vital for Colombia, so vital, in fact, that I would like to highlight it here: promote peaceful and inclusive societies for sustainable development, provide access to justice for all, and build effective, accountable, and inclusive institutions at all levels. Consequently, our joint commitment in Cauca refers not only to providing the communities we are helping with access to water, but also to working towards several of the outcomes of the joint program, such as strengthening local leadership to build peace and sustainable development, and improving food and nutritional autonomy and security on the basis of the communities. because only in this way is the infrastructures guaranteed to survive and be useful in the long term. As a result of the alliance in which Ferrovial and Save the Children are participating, along with other organizations such as the Sdg Fund in the framework of the joint program, the necessary efforts will be deployed to recover, strengthen, and foster the community skills that will make it possible to enhance the culture of water and administrations and fair governance of these resources. In short, if I may quote from the preamble to the Agenda 2030, there can be no sustainable development without peace and no peace without sustainable development. In this way, Ferrovial is sealing its commitment to peace in Colombia and is grateful to the Sdg Fund for the opportunity to play a direct role in the recovery of a region that deserves to regain enthusiasm and hope to develop prosperously and sustainably in peace. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Cristina. I think that the joint program that we started in Cauca now is really bigger and with more impact, just because we have now the angle of the access to water and sanitation for many people in the area. So thank you for that. And now I'm going to give the floor to the last member of the advisory group that explicitly requests for the floor, who is Michael Harrison. Michael is the Director of Vertical Strategy and Partnerships in Intel, which is also another company, the last one that joined the private sector advisory group just a year ago. So thank you for coming and welcome to the group.
I'm honored to be here. I'm grateful to be here with all of each and every one of you. I think there was a lot of hard work put into by this team to get to this point. I think what this PSAG report gives us is a framework to focus. It's one of those things where I think it gives us the ability to understand kind of the dynamics that we're in this public-private partnership, and it gives us the ability to understand it at a greater effort. And I appreciate for that, the work that was gone into that. I think that sustainable development is important to all of our futures, as was mentioned by some of the people as well, and it's something that we cannot take for granted. My role in verticals as well as education fits into all of these goals. We see that education as a catalyst for change, and it's a way to do transformation. And it's a great equality for all of us, and we can improve the lives of our future of our children. Education creates the next generation of leaders and also inspires those and changes people. I walked into many schools and seen kids change their perspective of the world, have a better outcome, and have changed, have more opportunity and more understanding of what their future can hold. And it's very inspirational to see the change in their lives, and brings a change in my life to see them. It's a challenge for each of us every day to try to help these children to become the best they can in their lives. I don't want to take too much time. I just want to say that the work is not done. I leave here glad to be part of this, and it's a challenge for us in the future to figure out how we can partner together in the future better. And I say, and that's it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Michael. I think that really what really shows the work with the private sector advisory group is the diversity of the companies, where we have different sizes, different sectors, and different geographical locations. So I think that is the way to show that it's possible to work with the private sector, and not only, I repeat, as a donor, but also as an actor. And with them, we can co-design and co-implement the programs in the field, which is part of the wealthy system that now we have with the new Agenda 2030. So I'm going to say thank you to all of you for being here. Thank you to the members of the panel, Ambassador Mejia, also Sol, also Rangita, Carla. Thank you so much for the work that you are doing, all of you, in different sectors and with different people. Thank you to all the members of the private sector advisory group that really did an incredible job. Thank you, Rangita, and thank you also, Bob Cosomano, for the work that you did in order to get the report on time. And for sure, thank you to the team of the SDG Fund that really did an incredible effort to have today the final version of the report. So I know that there are people that probably would like to do some questions and answers, but because we have to leave the room, if you don't mind, we can have a bilateral conversation just now when we finish. So thank you so much.